Good afternoon from Geneva, and good evening, good morning to everywhere else. And welcome to these two workshops on sustainable trade facilitation and the UN Trade Digitalization Index. Actually, you get two in one in these workshops because we do it almost back to back, but they are actually two workshops. Just for your information, we have a little more than 1,000 registered participants for these workshops. So right now we are around 250-60 that have already joined us. And I suggest that we start because we have a quite packed program. My name is Paul Hansen. I'm Chief of Trade Facilitation in UN Trade and Development. And with me here is Jan Duval from UN ESCAP, Chief of Trade Policy and Facilitation section, and Jan will be moderating this session, or this first session. I will be moderating the second session. Just a few household rules. First of all, if you have questions or comments, those that are online, please use the Q&A, and we will try to address as many of your questions as possible. And then secondly, this session is recorded for those of you that wish to come back to it, or for those of you that have colleagues that would like to see this afterwards. So you can, on our website, then access the recording afterwards. So I think without any further ado, I will hand over to Jan Duval, who will be moderating this first session on sustainable trade facilitation, progress made and way forward. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm seeing, oh, I'm on screen now. Okay, that's very good. So good afternoon to everyone online, mostly. We are only a small group here in person in Geneva. So this first session, I'm very happy to be here. We are organizing those sessions because, as you may know, the UN regional commissions, UNCTAD, collaborating on a UN global survey on digital and sustainable trade facilitation that we organize every 2 years, where we collect data on the implementation of digital and sustainable trade facilitation measures. And so we just released new data, I believe in July 2025. So now we are organizing additional events to try and go a little bit deeper on the data collected and the implications. So this is one of the workshops we're organizing in that context. So that first session is on sustainable trade facilitation, progress made and way forward. So we are going to try and focus quite specifically on a part of the survey, which is sustainable trade facilitation measures. And I'm sure, as you will hear, it covers agriculture trade facilitation measures, trade facilitation measures for women, trade facilitation measures for SMEs, and also now green trade facilitation measures. And so following the presentation by UNCTAD of the state of play on sustainable trade facilitation, we're going to have additional complementary presentation by experts. Mr. Anders Renberg from the ICC, International Chamber of Commerce. He's also director for the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation. Maria Teresa Pisani, which is good long-term collaborator on the UN Global Survey and many other things related to paperless trade that we are doing on in ESCAP. She's Chief AI of Trade Facilitation Section UNECE, and AI is not for artificial intelligence, it's for ad interim. Sorry, I just realized this after I said it. So, and then we have Salahin Khan. Salahin Khan, who is the Program Management Officer at UNEP, responsible for eCities. So he's going to tell us a little bit about this. After those 4 presentations, we're going to have 2 discussants. Jesse Nicol, who is a counselor and senior dispute settlement lawyer as well from the WTO. First time we met. I'm very happy to meet you. And then Silvia Sorescu from OECD, who is also supposed to join us I'm not 100% clear whether she's supposed to be in the room with us or online, but we will figure this out as we go. She's the last person in the program. So with no further ado, I think I can hand over back the floor to Paul to make the presentation on sustainable trade facilitation.
Very good, thank you, Jan. And I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't have an AI in my title, so there's no artificial intelligence to assist me, unfortunately. So that probably will become clear through the presentation. Thank you, Jan. So we will go into this presentation a little bit more in detail and a recent survey that we have done. So let's try and see if we can manage the presentation here. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, so for those of you that have maybe or are not so familiar with the global survey, there is actually a website. And under the picture here, you will see the HTTP for the website unsurvey.com and you can or .org, and you can go in and visit this. I would invite you to visit this, go in and look at the figures, which are broken down into quite some detail according to global figures, but also regional figures. And I think this is quite interesting, and you can also play around with the figures a little bit in here. If we go to the next slide, actually the global survey on digital and sustainable trade facilitation, it is the 6th time that UN is doing this survey, and it is done by the 5 UN regional commissions and UN Trade and Development. Initially, it was only the 5 regional commissions, and 3 years ago, I believe, we from UN Trade and Development joined this survey. In the 2025 edition, it covers 177 countries, and it covers 62 trade facilitation measures, and that is WTO trade facilitation agreement measures, and then what we call plus, which is the enlarged trade facilitation on sustainable trade facilitation measures. And this covers issues like digital trade facilitation, paperless trade, cross-border paperless trade, sustainable trade facilitation, so for instance, small and medium-sized companies, on agriculture and on women. And lastly, in this edition, we have also included trade facilitation for e-commerce, green trade facilitation, and trade finance. So again, I would welcome and invite you to visit the website and where you can go into detail. But I will try and go through some of the main results from this year's survey. So if we go to the next slide, this is the overall global implementation rate broken down in the various categories that we are using: transparency, formalities, institutional arrangement and cooperation, paperless trade, and cross-border paperless trade. And on the right-hand side, you will see the global average on implementation, which is around 70%. And then you will see broken down according to regions. Some regions are doing very well. Developed countries, it is no surprise that they have implemented or have a very high implementation rate. But there are other regions, such as, for instance, Southeast Asia, Southeast Europe, that are doing well. And there are a few regions that maybe need to increase their efforts in the implementation. If we then include also in the next slide the measures around trade facilitation for small and medium-sized companies, and also on agriculture, the global implementation rate falls. And that is not so surprising, because these measures are not obligatory measures or are not measures that are included in the WTO trade facilitation agreement. These are additional measures that countries can take in order to improve trade facilitation in various groups. Some of them are covered by the TFA, but some of them are maybe not So here we are seeing implementation rate globally of around 67%. And again, developed countries and Southeast Asia are doing particularly well. So the picture is more or less the same. Now, if we are then moving into the next slide here, we can see how the development has been since the last survey we made in 2023. And there, according to the global average, which is now on the left side, and from there we can then break it down into various regions, but also break it down towards the right side. You will see also broken down for landlocked developing countries, for least developed countries, and for small island developing nations. As you will see from this slide, there has been improvement in the implementation of trade facilitation everywhere over a broad bank. But in particular, and I think that is interesting, the increase has been remarkable in sub-Saharan Africa, in least developed countries with 8%, and with landlocked developing countries with a 9% increase. So I think we can see that those countries that are maybe needing to do more are also those countries that where we are now seeing that the implementation efforts are bearing fruit, and that they are joining up with countries that maybe previously had implemented more. So I think this is very positive to see, and it is very positive to see that there is development over a broad bank. If we move to the next slide, then we can also see the implementation broken down on the various categories, starting from the left side on transparency, formalities, institutional arrangements, paperless trade, cross-border paperless trade, and then some of the additional elements that this survey is measuring that maybe we do not see so clearly from other surveys, and definitely not through the WTO figures, because here these issues are not defined, such as trade facilitation for SMEs, agricultural trade facilitation and women, and trade finance and trade facilitation. And here you will also notice, again, there is development from 2023 to 2025 everywhere. And in particular, some of those issues that are not core issues of the WTO trade facilitation, they are the ones that has the biggest growth. So cross-border paperless trade, trade facilitation for SMEs, agricultural trade facilitation, and trade facilitation for women. And I think, again, this is very positive to see that there is more and more focus on some of these issues that maybe previously was more marginal, but that we increasingly are focusing on. If we move to the next slide, then we will see a slide that now includes issues around trade facilitation for e-commerce and green trade facilitation. What do we mean by these terms? Well, first of all, these terms are new in this year's survey. And when we talk about e-commerce, we specifically look at some of those obligations or some of those measures that are benefiting or are valuable for e-commerce, such as, for instance, do countries have de minimis regimes? Are there e-commerce trade agreements, and is there immediate release procedures for e-commerce? And when we are talking about green trade facilitation, specifically on waste and green goods, on, for instance, the e-CITES permits, so for endangered species, and also on sustainable reporting. And here you will see certainly that there is certain areas where there is pretty good implementation, but there are other areas where we are kind of lacking behind when we look at the geographical distribution. It is natural that the implementation percentages here are not as high, because these are new issues that has not been focused on maybe so much in detail. but nevertheless, we see that there is development in all areas. There is implementation in all geographical areas on these issues. But if we look at the figures also, these are maybe some of the areas and some of the issues we can discuss where additional attention has to be looked at in the coming years on trying to implement further elements around e-commerce and green trade. If we talk about, for instance, e-commerce now, de minimis regimes are, of course, very much in focus in many countries together with the tariff issues. So maybe this is something that also will impact, for instance, de minimis rules implementation in the future. Moving to the next slide, we can then look at where we see that there is the most implementation of various measures and maybe the least implementation of various measures. And again, on the left-hand side column, we have tried to break it down from the top, the more traditional elements, transparency, formalities, institutional arrangements. Then those lines in yellow are addressing trade facilitation for SMEs, agricultural trade facilitation for women. And then below that, we see some of the new areas that we have included, namely on e-commerce, trade, green trade facilitation, and trade finance. And you will see that we then, in the next column, mentioned first those that with the most implementation, and I do not need to go through all of them, but in general, if we just take the top implemented measure on transparency, online publication of import, export, and transit regulations, 97%, where countries have either fully implemented or started to implement. And the figure 55.7% is countries that have fully implemented this measure. So the first number, 97%, are countries that have either started or fully implemented, and 55% are countries that have fully implemented. So I think this is very much evidence that transparency is one of those obligations that countries really are focusing on, taking serious, and it is, of course, one of those areas that is very helpful for industry. If we then move on to least implemented, and here we then come to, on transparency, advanced publication, notification of trade regulation, and there you will see that the figure is then down to 88%. It is still pretty good, where countries either have fully implemented or partially implemented, and 62% where countries have fully implemented. So I think if we look at transparency, both most implemented and actually also least implemented, the figure is pretty good. But if we move down along then the various issues, and maybe we can move down to the category trade facilitation for SMEs, trade-related information measures, that very much is going hand in hand with transparency. But if you look at the least implemented measures, small and medium-sized enterprises access to single window. Countries that either have implemented or have started is at 54%, and countries that have fully implemented this measure, now we are down to 16%. So here, for small and medium-sized enterprises, the trade facilitation impact is still to be fully gained. And therefore, I think it is quite clear from this that there are certain areas in our survey where we clearly can see that there is much more to do. I will not go through all of these. You can study these, and you can go into this presentation. You can go into the website and study these in much more detail. But I think if we look at the right-hand side column on the least implemented measures and look at some of these issues for trade facilitation for small and medium-sized enterprises, agricultural trade facilitation, and moving further down, e-commerce, green trade facilitation, here there is definitely much work to do at national level and also at multilateral level, where we can together jointly focus on these issues to get these implemented. If we are then moving on to the next slide, and I will only in detail kind of introduce the first slide here. There are similar slides for other areas. But if we specifically look at the state of implementation of trade facilitation measures for small and medium-sized enterprises globally, we can then look at breaking down the various components that we are measuring. So we are starting by trade-related information measures for small and medium-sized enterprises, small and medium-sized enterprises in national committees, other special measures that benefit small and medium-sized enterprises. We have then also focused at small and medium-sized enterprises in AO schemes, and finally, small and medium-sized enterprises access to single window. And here you see the dark blue part here is where countries have fully implemented. The kind of lighter blue is partially implemented. The light blue is then indicating pilot states of implementation. Gray is not implemented, and the last is we have no information. And you will see the scale from trade-related information measures on the top, fully implemented. We are pretty, it's pretty good. It's around 55%, right? And where then partially implemented, then we move all the way up to 80%. But as we move down here and come all the way down to both SMEs for in AO schemes and also SMEs access to single window, here we can clearly see that the implementation, even with pilot states, is barely over 50%. And there is still a lot of countries that have to start implementation and start focusing on these areas. So again, for SMEs, a lot of work to be done and a lot of focus for countries and maybe also multilaterals to start assisting in this area. And we have then slides, similar slides on agricultural trade facilitation. It is the same. You will see on the right side the breakdown on what it is that we are asking in the survey. So special treatment for perishable goods, SPS testing, SPS national standards, and e-application and issuance of SPS certificates. And again, the picture is the same. For the first part, special treatment for perishable goods, it is pretty good. We are almost at 90% when we look at either full or partial implementation. But whereas when we come down to some of the digital measures, e-application and issuance of SPS certificates, the full implementation is around 30. With the partial implementation, we are around 60% implementation, and pilot and not started yet, then we still have quite a lot to do. If we move on to state of implementation for agricultural trade or for women in trade, I believe it is, although the heading here is wrong, so it should say state of implementation for women in trade. You will also see on the right side what we have measured. Are there women membership of national trade facilitation committees? Are there special measures that are benefiting women? And are there policies and strategies where women are encouraged to participate? And here, I think we can clearly agree that there is still a lot to do in many countries. The full implementation is barely reaching 20% in any of these measures. There is measures underway, but there is still a lot to do. And if we then move to the final slide, and these are some of the takeaways that I have noted here, and that maybe can also be noted and discussed. So first of all, there is clear momentum and there is still clear positive implementation, but focus should now be widened to also focus more on implementation of trade facilitation measures that are sustainable, inclusive, and digital. Paperless trade growth is there, but there is also clear evidence that cross-border systems and cross-border trade here is still quite weak. In some regions, it is has a very positive and had reached very good levels, amongst other Asia Pacific, where there is an agreement on this. But in other areas, we still have to do much more. Small and medium-sized enterprises are not yet that well integrated into the advanced systems. So, for instance, into the digital systems. However, they have access to trade information, and there is a positive trend. Gender responsiveness and gender inclusion in trade facilitation is still at an early stage. And I want here to try and promote some of the good practices. And one of these that we always promote is, for instance, in Ghana, where the National Trade Facilitation Committee has a special subcommittee on gender and trade facilitation. And I think this is a very good practice that many other countries could learn from. So if there is interest in this, we are certainly ready also to assist with this. But again, to implement strategies and policies that support gender responsiveness in trade facilitation is not yet that regular an occurrence. Agricultural trade facilitation is very strong on the perishable goods facilitation and also on the SPS infrastructure, but the digital part is lagging behind, and that's maybe a general conclusion that there is still a lot of work to be done in the digital area. E-commerce and trade facilitation is progressing. There are rules here, but again, AEO and cross-border e-commerce having specific rules and obligations and measures here are rare and need to be given further attention. And finally, green trade facilitation is by far the least developed area with low implementation, but certainly an area that should be given much more focus in the future, and where we need to think much more how we can contribute both at national level and from multilateral side, also to encourage more implementation in this area. So I will stop here. Again, I will encourage you to visit the website, to look at the figures for your country, for regions, and at global levels. And then I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the comprehensive presentation of the survey. So as I'm sure everybody understood from the presentation, sustainable trade facilitation in the survey covers in particular trade facilitation measures for SMEs, trade facilitation measures for agriculture, trade facilitation measures for women, and now a new area that we just added for 2025, green trade facilitation measures. And so it was very clear that essentially all of those areas, except possibly agricultural trade facilitation measures, are less implemented than many of the traditional areas covered in trade facilitation. And then from a policy making point of view, I mean, the question that comes in is, you know, is it good enough to have a general trade facilitation program and trade facilitation measures that apply to everybody, or do you really need to include in a trade facilitation program, action plan? Do you need to have trade facilitation measures specifically focused on sectors, on specific sectors, on special groups that have been identified as needing particular support, and also measures specifically designed with the climate change crisis or the environment in mind? So that's really the broad question. And then from the UN, from the ones who actually designed and implementing the survey, the answer to that question would be yes. Otherwise, they would not be including the survey at this point, right? But if you look at national plan for trade facilitation around the world, you still don't have, in many cases, those sector-specific measures in place, for example. So that's an important thing to think about. We have 3 more presentations. So I'm asking everybody to keep to time, which is about, I think, 10 minutes we agreed or something like this. And then if you can highlight emerging good practices as much as possible in your presentation, I think that would be very useful. So next in the list is Anders from ICC.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the presentation and for the invitation. For those of you who don't know the Global Alliance, just a quick word is that we are a public-private partnership initiative that helps developing countries implement trade facilitation. Originally the TFA, but now slightly beyond that. We work together with local chambers of commerce, global business, but of course also governments and UN agencies and others in our implementation and in the work that we are doing. And I wanted to touch in particular on the green and environmental aspects, and not least based on what Paul was mentioning and also Jan, that this is a topic where there is more work required and also more science required, more evidence required on what has been done. But perhaps first, there's a general observation from our conversations with business, and I realize this is perhaps both stating the obvious and swearing in church, but trade facilitation, when we talk to business, does not carry the weight it did a couple of years ago. Neither does it sometimes when we talk to governments. But if we speak about supply chain resilience, if we speak about public health, if we speak about the topics that trade facilitation solves, those are top of mind for business and for government. And I think this is something for those of us who love these topics and love discussing them. I think it's something worth keeping in mind and something that we're trying to push more and more to promote, not just best practices, but also the realization that this doesn't solve all issues, but it does solve a lot of what business and governments are worried about at the moment. And this is not least true when it comes to sustainability and the greening of trade, which is of course an extremely important topic and one that is sincerely in need of a lot more work. So perhaps zooming in on that and also mentioning on the fact that that we need more evidence on this. I think we are in these days, or this week actually, publishing a paper called Move Goods, Not Paper, that is specifically focusing on the experience of the eFITO solution, where we worked with, obviously based on IPPC and FAO's eFITO hub, but also based and looked at previous research, not least from Jan, who I think pioneered this topic. We're actually looking at greenhouse emissions and what trade facilitation solves. And not to get into too much details on the eFITO nor on the conclusions of our report, but it is pretty evident, even though, and again, back to Paul's point, only 5% of certificates issued are digital. And yet, even despite that, if we're looking between 2018 and 2024, it has been able to reduce greenhouse emissions, our estimates are at least, by 63,300 CO2 equivalent, or 2.9 million trees planted. So there is a lot of potential in this area, and it's a lot of interest, both from the private sector that we're talking with, to solve these issues and to work on it. But I think also, and this is also coming back to sort of our general take on things and our point of view, bad implementation kills good policies. It kills good digitalization. It kills good sustainability practices. And an experience that we often see, and that I think all of us are quite experienced with now, is if you look at how something works in theory and how something works in practice. If you look at how something, what is being reported to the WTO, and you look at a border post, you're not always going to find the same results and conclusions. And this is not least the case when it comes to SMEs and women in trade. Obviously, as the Alliance, we work with global businesses, IKEA, H&M, Adidas, and Nike. They also struggle and they also have issues when things are not working. But they do have a compliance department. They do have people managing customs. And again, it's stated obvious, but if you're a company with 4 people trading from a developing country, you're not going to have that luxury. You're not going to have that privilege. And the system needs to work and it needs to function for you. And this is something that many, I mean, at least we've been talking to Bill before here on the World Bank, but many of us are working on, and something I think needs to be stepped up as well. And I think also coming back to where we see needs, I think an area, and again, back to environmental, is circular economy. This is, again, buzzwords, things that people care about, things that businesses are talking about, but where the sheer requirements in terms of certificates, in terms of obligations, makes it nearly impossible sometimes. Yes, it's about policies, but it's also about implementing things such as the Basel Convention or other things to make sure that e-waste or textiles can move. And I think this is at least as far as we're seeing it, an area that needs more focus, and that we also, from a private sector point of view, hear a lot of companies talk about. But I think also, and I'll keep it short, but maybe to end, we've also, since a big topic of mine here is digitalization, and obviously a lot of the work that the Alliance does is on digitalization and simplifying processes through digitalization or digitization of documents. But that alone, and again, stating the obvious, but will not solve things. And we need to look at it in a bigger picture. We're talking about women and SMEs in trade. There's still plenty of border posts out there and borders that doesn't have toilets for women. So how you can have the most digitalized system in the world, but if you can't access a toilet, well, then you're going to have an issue. And that's not something that we might be able to solve necessarily. But I think we need to, and again, coming back to the points that previously mentioned, we need to look at this from a broad point of view. If we're talking about digitalizing systems, if we're talking about implementation, we need to look at it holistically, and we need to look at it from a user point of view. Talking to the chambers of commerce and other stakeholders, talking to business, talking to people who will be using the systems and making sure that it works for them. I think this is some of what we're focusing on. So there's a lot more, but Jan, in the interest of time, I'll keep you to that.
Thank you very much for your insights. I think the prioritization of measures, right? And it's not only trade facilitation measures, actually, it's any trade-related measures is I think a very important point, right? And it goes back again to the idea of what should you include in your trade facilitation program? You know, in some countries, it may make a lot of sense to actually to focus your trade fashion program on agriculture and not on something else, because agriculture is so important for your country, right? It can be SMEs, can be women. I mean, so I think it will vary quite a bit. And then you mentioned toilets, right? So everybody caught that, I'm sure. But this, I think, the symbol of that is we're talking about infrastructure, right? And these always come back as well, right? A lot of trade facilitation. But what if the basic infrastructure is not in place at the border, for example, right? So I think there's no easy answer to that, and then definitely you need to have both. And so it's important that the trade infrastructure program includes facilitation component, but it's also probably very important that the facilitation program don't be implemented without any thought about infrastructure. So thank you very much for those insights. Let me move to the next speaker. And somehow I cannot see the program anymore, but I think it's Maria Teresa, right? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan, and good afternoon also on my side from here in Geneva. So my presentation is going to be about the performance on sustainable trade facilitation for the UNEC region, the region of the United Nations Economic Coalition for Europe. It's a diverse region because with 56 member states, our region includes advanced economies, North America, the UK, the European Union, the Russian Federation, and transition economies, including from the Central Asia, a sub-region that we share with ESCAP, that we cover together with ESCAP, including 6 landlocked developing countries. So a diverse region, and actually our the results of our survey show that diversity. Now, for the 2025 survey, 48 out of the 56 member states have participated in the survey. So we thank these member states for their valuable input and contribution. Very important. What the survey shows is that the overall implementation rate in the region has increased between 2023 and 2025 from 79% to 82%, which is well above the global average that Paul was mentioning. Global average is 70.5%. So we have reached 82%, and notably we have a very interesting increase on the performance for cross-border paperless trade. The increase in the implementation of measures surveyed is 6%, and this is certainly thanks to increasing attention to the adoption of supporting strategies, policies, regulations, but also implementation and application of implementation standards. In the UK, for instance, the digitalization strategy 2025-2030, the European Union this year has just passed a new regulation on paperless freight transport.
Can you speak a little bit louder, because people are saying that they can't hear.
Yeah, and I think the microphone must be somewhere around this area. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's just here.
So just shout like I did.
Thank you for the suggestion. So that 6% increase on cross-border paperless trade, I would say very much linked to an acceleration in the adoption of policies, strategies, legal frameworks, implementation of supporting standards. And I was giving the example, for instance, of the UK with the digitalization strategy 2025-2030, or at the European level this year, the regulation on paperless freight transport, the ESCAP regulation that actually also mandates the application of UNCPAC standards, the by-ship reference data model, or for the Central Asian region, the roadmap of the special program for economies of Central Asia, the SPECA roadmap on digital connectivity. So all these policy regulatory developments contribute to this good performance on cross-border paperless trade for the region. Now, if we move to the performance on the sustainability dimension and set of measures covered by the survey, in this slide, actually, we can get an overview of the overall performance on all sets of measures. This graph included in the report shows it has the blue dots that represent the measures and show the distribution of the percentages of implementation relative to average implementation of each trade facilitation category, with a light green bar in the center. And here we see that the sustainable trade facilitation measures have some of the lowest implementation rates, something that reflects the global trend. Trade facilitation for SMEs reached 64%. Trade facilitation measures for women-led businesses lands at 44%. And green trade facilitation, which is the new set of measures introduced for the 2025 survey beyond the measurement of the performance and implementation of e-filings, still is at 29% for the region. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we see the performance a little bit on a more detailed level on each group of sustainability measures. Yes. And here we can see that the agricultural trade facilitation reached the highest implementation rate among the sustainable trade facilitation measures. Very interesting within the region, the performance of the Russian Federation, of the European Union +4, with the +4 including the Canada, Sweden, Switzerland and the UK, and the performance of Caucasus and the Turkey, which is above 90%, and above, while Eastern Europe, including Moldova and Belarus, there is progress to be made there. The percentage is 42% only. When we go to the trade facilitation for SMEs, in fact, we have good progress since the 2023 survey with plus 15%. And overall, for the region, we have reached an average implementation rate of 64%. Here, particular attention to SMEs is devoted in the North America, Caucasus and Turkey, and Central Asian region. And I will give in a moment some examples of the specific measures that have been undertaken by these countries. Moving on to the next slide, for trade facilitation and women and green trade facilitation, as we have seen also at the global level, also for the UNEC region, these are the least implemented measure, only 44% and 29% implementation rates respectively. On trade facilitation and women, Russian Federation has 100% implementation of the measures included in the survey, while for the green trade facilitation, again, the Russian Federation is performing very well on the measures surveyed, but I would also like perhaps to mention about progress in Turkey, in the EU plus 4 with 44 and 31% respectively. And on the green trade facilitation, for instance, the European Union, I think it's an interesting sub-region to look at, because over the last 2-3 years, I would say there has been a real acceleration on the adoption and implementation of regulation, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Due Diligence Directive. These are very important regulatory developments that are going, let's say, to influence and shape trade with, let's say, with external partners to the European Union in order to export to the European Union. In this regulation, there is a strong emphasis on compliance with environmental, social, good governance standards. So the understanding of these standards, the capacity to comply with these standards for trading partners of jurisdictions that adopt this kind of regulation and legislation is going to be very important. So certainly the green trade facilitation dimension will be increasingly in focus in the trade facilitation agenda. So in the next slide, a recollection of some examples of specific measures that for the sustainability pillar of the survey are going to be presented in the UNEC report. For trade facilitation and women in particular, interesting the case of Azerbaijan, for instance, that has established a commission on business environment and international rankings with regular training undertaken for women entrepreneurs. Or the Republic of Moldova, for instance, has put in place a women's economic empowerment roadmap that was adopted in 2023, and 6 out of 9 of the National Trade Facilitation Committee working groups are led by women. On trade facilitation for SMEs, the example of Tajikistan, for instance, with an export support program launched in July 2025, specifically targeting SMEs, the business incubation project, or the National Trade Facilitation Roadmap for Export Enhancement and Diversification that has been developed with UNEC, with support of UNCTAD, that has a chapter specifically focusing on support measures for SMEs. on green trade facilitation, and here compliance with the Basel Convention, very important, basic convention that provides this global legal framework, and efforts to countries to put in place specific legislation to enforce the requirements of the convention. Azerbaijan here or Kazakhstan that has established rules for import, export, and transit of hazardous and other waste, again in compliance with this convention, or the responsible producer obligations that have been introduced in 2021. Moving on to the next slide, please. Here, again, like in the presentation delivered by Paul, the UNEC report will provide an overview of the most and least implemented measures for all trade facilitation measures categories. But here you can see and get an overview of the most least implemented for the sustainability pillar of the survey. So, for instance, most implemented include trade-related information measures for SMEs, while least implemented trade facilitation of green and climate smart goods, which, as I said, is a set of measures there. The least implemented that will particularly require technical assistance and capacity building for developing countries and transition economies, as it's going to be quite complex, the compliance. Moving on to the next slide, and getting to almost the conclusion. The UNEC report, and here it's a very small text, apologies for that, but just wanted to give a snapshot of a table that the UNEC report includes, and that is a mapping of all the measures included in the survey, the trade facilitation agreement measures and the plus measures to UNEC, UNCFACT supporting instruments. UNEC, UNCFACT has developed something like 49 policy recommendations and about 950 e-business standards. Policy recommendations includes those on single window implementation, but just now we have passed a new policy recommendation on traceability and transparency of compliance with ESG requirements along value chains, textile, critical raw materials, other food, that are going to prove very important to support countries in implementing the TFA ++ type of measures, or e-business standards like UN Law Code, the UN EDIFACT, the UN Core Component Library, and reference and BASHIP reference data models that are very important for digital connectivity and cross-border paperless trade. So you will have that mapping table with hyperlinks to the specific instruments. And finally, just onto the next slide, please, the key messages. To conclude, so trade facilitation for SMEs and agricultural trade facilitation has experienced a good increase in implementation rates, while trade facilitation of women continues to lag behind. Green trade facilitation has the lowest implementation rate across all subgroups of measures. Transition economies have made significant progress in implementing trade facilitation, sustainable trade facilitation measures, especially for the Caucasus, Turkey, and Central Asia, but the gaps are still there, so there is need for technical assistance, capacity building, and here is where really the survey helps and supports, because it helps identify where countries are lagging behind on specific measures and where the donors community can, let's say, target development cooperation assistance. Now, for the new group of green trade facilitation measures, I already mentioned specific instruments that UNEC, UNCFACT have developed, but also let me mention about a new policy recommendation that we are developing, which is the recommendation 50 on digital connectivity for transit corridors, and that is going to be a recommendation that will provide guidance, particularly to landlocked developing countries. It was presented in AWASA and the LLDC3, and is going to be also included in a WTO report. The WTO is finalizing exactly on transit corridors for LLDC. And finally, an invitation to the UN CFACT forum. If you want to the next slide, please. The 44th UN CFACT forum, bringing together our global community of experts advancing on the development of policy recommendations and standards in support of implementation of many of the measures in the survey, taking place on 24-28 November in Dakar, Senegal. You are all cordially invited to join, and looking forward to having you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maria Teresa, for your presentation. I mean, you covered a lot of ground, essentially the entire survey, but with a specific focus on sustainable trade facilitation as well. Thank you for giving a few examples of specific way to some of those measures can be implemented. Right at the end of the day, it's the most important thing is to try to identify some of the good practices associated with sustainable trade facilitation measure implementation. Because again, as we've seen in the results of the survey, it's not implemented widely. So the more we can accumulate, cases, I think Paul mentioned Ghana, one case, that if we can compile some of this, and I see I'm encouraging everybody in the room actually to log in the Zoom meeting, because you can see the questions and the comments, right? And there's a lot of questions and comments. And one of the suggestions that is there is that question is there an online hub where we can find green sustainable practices implemented in countries, right? So to my knowledge, this doesn't exist yet, right? Maybe WCO has something on green customs, potentially, but I'm happy to inform that ESCAP, together with the Asian Development Bank, and actually UNCTAD as well, is ramping up a lot of work on green trade facilitation and climate smart trade facilitation. So one of the things that might come out of this is exactly this, a space where we're going to have that. Yes, Maya.
That the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, which is supported by UNEP, actually provides a collection of good practices on trade, green trade, and some maybe also pertaining green trade facilitation. So that I think that is progress. It's an important knowledge source. But at UNEC, with the sustainability pledge, for instance, on the green trade facilitation and the traceability of compliance with ESG requirements and standards in value chains, we have connected pledges and are just publishing now. I've just published in July a report on good practices, which cover more than government practices, private companies practices. So that is also an interesting source of information and knowledge.
Okay, did I miss it, or you didn't really go into your traceability project? Did you cover your traceability project?
Not in detail.
Okay, because I think actually it was mentioned because actually I feel the traceability work is actually very relevant when we're talking about sustainable trade facilitation. So, okay, so
compliant with regulation and legislation on due diligence, corporate sustainability reporting, which is adopted at the EU level, but also China, the United States, Australia, many jurisdictions are moving in that direction. So that standardization works.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, in terms of presentation, last but not least, Salahin Khan, actually is from UNEP. So you can tell us all. Do you know anything about the green growth platform of the green? Please, Salahin, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan. Yeah, so let me clarify. I'm part of UNEP, yes, but I'm particularly from the CITES Secretariat, so which is a multilateral environment agreement. And sometimes people get confused. It's also true that we are UNEP or not. We have the discussion all the time. So. But thank you very much, Jan, and for the invitation to speak at this workshop. Very timely, very relevant, And as someone who has been part of the UN Global Survey before in my previous organizations, I feel very close to the survey. And I would like to also thank all the partners, the regional commissions and UNCTAD, for including the new indicator on electronic site permitting systems. Is very welcome. This is the second year, I think, we have included this indicator, and so we are still kind of in a way testing phase of this indicator. In my presentation, I'm going to talk about basically, I'll sort of give an overview of what is the context, sort of set the context. I'll give you some status based on the survey results, and then some related challenges of the ESCAP implementation, and then perhaps provide some guidance of how, from the Secretariat itself, how we kind of see ourselves developing, which direction, and based on what we develop our guidance. So next slide, please. Thank you. So let me begin with the convention. It's a convention on international trade in endangered species of all fauna and flora, established in 1973, and it's a multilateral environment, rightly exactly sitting at the intersection between trade and conservation. And it has about, we have 185 parties, including the European Union, and the CITES regulates more than 41,000 species. And the trade is regulated, not only species, not the animals, live animals, but also plants, dead parts, derivatives, products, etc. So the objective is very nice. Is really sustainable, traceable, and legal wildlife trade, but not only, right? So ultimately, the conservation is a big issue, and also supporting the livelihoods of the people living off the wildlife is another main target. CITES, we celebrate the 50th anniversary this year of the convention coming into force, so it's quite special for us this year. Next, sorry, not me, you. Next slide, please. Thank you. Move right on. So unfortunately, there's a lot of illegal trade, wildlife trade, as you probably know. I mean, illegal trade, the kind of the way we define it, illegal wildlife trade is that cannot be legally traded, commercially traded, or those species that are outside the scope of the CITES convention. Next slide, please. As you can see, the conservation is not only the only issue here. There are many economic sectors that rely on CITES trade, really related to the food industry, the timber industry, the pharmaceuticals, the cosmetics, the fashion industry, etc. So it has I mean, the bigger reason for also implementing electronic permitting, CITES permitting system is actually also in a way supporting this kind of advancing this legal trade. Next slide, please. We have over 25 million transactions recorded in the CITES database. So CITES database is something that where all the CITES parties provide annually their reports, the trade reports. So I must sort of give you an information about here that as we talk about inclusion of including the inside the survey, but let's think of all the overall context of inclusion in terms of trade statistics. CITES trade is not part of UN trade. It is some of it, right? Those that are part of the let's say watch industry or tourism or some trades, but not the entire trade. So we do not have even a proper official trade value data that we can claim that this is exactly the value of trade annually. So this is where you're starting from, right? So in terms of giving you a kind of what kind of problem we are into. And actually, my point in all my presentation is implementation of ESCAP systems, first off for these statistics, reporting, and then compliance, and then you can go on and on. So our estimate is $220 billion worth of wildlife trade annually, both CITES and non-CITES perhaps. Next slide, please. Now, the objective of the CITES is, again, it's not sort of for the sake of implementing a digital solution, but actually really helping the compliant CITES trade to do much more with this, and also to simplify the process and really implement the objective of the convention itself. Next slide, please. And in an ideal ESCAP permitting system, what we call an ideal ESCAP permitting system, or ESCAP in short, We have four distinct sections that we talk about. There's one includes the electronic applications and issuance. Second is the electronic control or authentication of status permits at the border. Then we have the reporting or the statistic generation, and then we have the exchange of permit between the parties. Next slide, please. So how the electronic status permitting system helps the parties really. The first off is you can really have verifiable legal information. The origin, it is any status trait needs to be verified and legally acquired. So this information can be easily accessible from these permit. The second is we have the scientific evidence that the species in question does not have the threat to the survival of itself. So we have the scientific proof that it is managed, it is properly managed, and it is legally traded. We can support the quota management from there, export quota, etc. We also have the traceability data as much as the transaction goes, the trader profile, etc. When it is connected to a traceability system, the supply chain traceability system, it can be considered an end-to-end kind of support tool. So beyond that, the big question of generating statistics, I think, is also helping is actually a major point that through which the parties can be benefited. Next slide, please. Now, going into the current status of the ESCAP implementation based on the survey, I have just took the data from the website, and I must tell that there may be slight discrepancy from the website data because there has been some updates have been done internally which have not been updated in the page yet. So it's from the survey this year, we have seen that about 60 parties have somewhat implemented the status permitting systems across the globe. Now there are some countries who did not participate in the survey, I'm sure. So there may be here and there a few countries here and there, but more or less it gives an indication of how many, sort of 1/3 of the parties have somewhat implemented the status permitting system, and 19 parties have just begun or in the pilot stage of developing the system. The numbers are actually doubled in terms of partial implementation, has doubled since 2023. Next slide, please. If you look at the regions, it's quite a lot of variation there, and clearly Europe being the leader in terms of partially implementing the status system first, followed by Asia Pacific and then the Latin American region, and Africa and Western Asia region are actually quite behind. Which gives us a proper sense of what from the Secretariat, what we experienced working with the parties. So this gives a good indication of which region actually needs some more support. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at, we take a sort of deeper look, closer look at the results. I mean, not at these results, but this doesn't come from the survey, but kind of from our experience. What do we mean by partial implementation? When we think of our knowledge, our information from the parties, it shows that there's a huge variation in terms of the functionalities of the systems, ESCAP systems of the parties. So some of them only allows application, some of them only allow application and issuance, some of them, a few of them includes electronic control, but most of them don't. So there's a huge level of variation. It's not really clear sometimes if you do not really go in depth in terms of the functionality, and then it also has a bearing on the efficiency of the system. It's clear that there is also lack of implementation of the international standards. At the Secretariat, we based on the UNEC, CFACT reference data model, we have also our own data set, ESCAP data model, also based on the WCO data model. So, but few of them have implemented them, not all of them. So these are some of the issues that we have. Again, coming back to the statistic issue, because reporting is very important from the site Secretariat point of view. We need to know how much trade has actually happened. So some parties are not able to report on the actual trade, the specimens that have crossed the border. They provide us the report on number of permits issued, right? And that does not actually mean that it has crossed the border. So there are some variations there, inconsistency there in terms of reporting practices also. And obviously, as we all kind of can imagine, there's also interoperability challenges between within the national systems, so between customs and CITES. Next slide, please. So as I said, our CITES standards are based on CFAC and WCO data model, but for us, data interoperability between customs is really key. Electronic digital solutions development these days is not a big issue. If you ask any even developing countries can do it, but based on international standards and with the functionality of interoperability between the customs or the border agencies are really key for us. For that matter, when we talk about inclusion, and thank Paul for mentioning this, how to include and other green TF measures into the survey or in the discussions more and more. And also recently being asking about questions about how many, let's say, CITES management authorities are part of the National Trade Facilitation Committee. Perhaps this is the time we should kind of ask those questions. And how far these needs from the CITES management authority, which are again an OGS government agencies, needs are reflected in the discussion of the National Trade Facilitation Committees. So yeah, I would kind of leave it there. And then next slide, please. So again, as I said, for the CITES convention, compliance data, traceability data, enforcement, scientific reporting, everything is based on the data. And the eCites is really at the core of this system. And so it is the single system that can generate a lot of data for us, which really helps us to make policy decisions in terms of either including the species or excluding the species from the convention, and which has direct bearing on the biodiversity and conservation. Next slide, please. So I'll just give you some examples of, I have not picked any single country just to show, but I'm just showing that what we have in terms of guidance and what we are trying to promote across our parties in terms of guidance. So this is the latest version of our toolkit, which includes the technical specification, as I said, based on both even CFAC and WCO data models. This is for free, and we encourage, and we have resolutions for the parties to implement them. We provide technical assistance as much as possible with the limited resources. Yeah, with this toolkit. Next slide, please. Then recently, as I said, electronic control is very important for the CITES trade. So authentication and validation of permits at the border is very important for us. So that's why, based on the demand from the parties, we have developed this guidance on use of barcodes on the CITES permitting system, and then we have specific technical specification what should be in that barcode, and how this can be made security with encrypted data with digital signatures, so that anyone who wants to verify the data with the actual permit can be verified. Next one, please. We have a project implementation guidance as well. So just to give an overview of how to manage any CITES project, and also with this is why we also include the thinking holistically in terms of national TF and other issues to making consideration of those and making some assessments before implementing the CITES module. Next one, please. This is latest. This is a guidance that we would like to update. This is still not updated based on the latest standard, but we had started between 2 or 3 parties exchanging permit information for CITES permit information. We do have the guidance on that as well. Unfortunately, we have not been able to make any headway still, but we would like to. We hopefully next year or so we would like to see some countries pilot testing this exchange of permit information. Next one, please. Coming close to the presentation, so I'd like to thank all the donors and the partners for all through that everyone is here. So yeah, again, without the support of all these organizations, obviously wherever we are, there's a secretariat, we could not have come this far. So thank you, all of you. And maybe I'll just, next one. Just again, would like to invite all of you to the CITES COP, the Conference of the Parties, COP20, happening end of this year, 24th or 5th December in Samarkand. This is a huge event for us. It's once in 3 years, and it's the biggest event for us. And we will have discussions over electronic status permitting systems and how do we take it, how do we advance the agenda. We also have a side event on e-status permitting systems on 3rd of December. So you're also very much welcome to participate. It's in the Asia region or Europe region, Central Asia region.
Uzbekistan?
And so
it's Asia for sure. But my colleague will say it's Europe. Or
So I went to the question when I was doing my analysis of the data.
Okay.
Was it from Asia Pacific or Europe? So let me not go into that. So, but this is good. We cover both the regions. So, but again, if you can come, please, you are most welcome to attend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanahin. I mean, I think your presentation is useful in the sense that it's on a specific measure. It's on e-CITES, right? So, and you can see the level of complexity involved in implementing this, right? And we're talking about just one particular measure, right? Which is at the crossroad between actually trade digitalization and sustainable trade facilitation. And those tradition and sustainable trade facilitation are very much linked together. But it's really, I keep seeing a lot of questions also on the website, it's difficult to answer anything in a very simple way, right? Because we are talking about difficult things to do and complex things to do. So everyone, I think, the job, I guess, is we have to keep studying and learning from each other so we can come up with what we think is the right solution. But I think no one really has the solution. I think how many years since e-CITES initiative started?
It first started, we developed our first toolkit, if I may say, from that one, maybe the development is 2010.
Yeah, so 2010, we are 15 years later.
Actually, I'm quite happy that also to report, maybe unofficially also, that our colleague sister multilateral environment agreement from the PRS Convention, the Basel Convention, they're also following through this our approach, and they're also working on their electronic permit certificate. So
hopefully everybody uses similar standard.
Yeah. So CITES is one of the initial MES to, I think, maybe the first one to develop an electronic CITES standards based on the EC and the WCO model.
Okay.
But yeah, this is a long journey.
Thank you very much. So now we are moving to discussions. So we've heard a lot of things. So I think both our discussions have slides as well. So you're welcome, but if you can possibly also react to some of the presentation that were made in the process, that would be great. So first discussion is Jesse Nicol from WTO, and everybody's always very happy to hear from WTO. So so a lot of pressure here.
Thank you, Jan, for that. And thank you, Jan and Paul, for the invitation. And really, I want to commend the regional commissions and UNCTAD for this really insightful work. I think I lost a little sleep last night looking through the 2023 results. So thank you for that. So let me start. I mean, I will change gears a bit here at the intro and just sort of focus initially on sort of where the global community stands in terms of implementation commitments under the Trade Facilitation Agreement. So you see on this initial slide that 166 WTO members have committed to 85% adherence to the TFA. Now, if you look at what has happened since 2017, so you can see there was a sort of 50% commitment in 2017. So since 2017, that is where members have asked for more time or for development assistance. We're about 2/3 of the way there. So even in respect of core TFA obligations, there's still some way to go. But what I want to suggest in the context of this discussion is it's also a very good opportunity. I mean, among these measures, you probably are familiar with the measures that are still pose the greatest challenge. We're talking about single window, test procedures, AEO, risk management, border agency cooperation. And here are some good opportunities, I think, over the next several years, as you'll see if you could pass to the next slide. I'm trying to move quickly because I know we're a bit behind time. Here is the category C measures. So these are measures for which members have requested development assistance. And if you look at where we are currently, we are at that peak. Over the next 5 years, that is through 2030, there are over 500 measures. That's nearly 50% of the category C provisions, which have to be implemented within the next 5 years. Now, if you go to the next slide, obviously what you see in a TFA commitment is different than what we see from the survey. I think it's important to draw that distinction. These are, legal undertakings, whereas what we're seeing through the UN Global Surveys is a real effort to document or to capture actual implementation. But what was interesting to me, and actually looking at a lot of the numbers, is it's not a huge difference. Yes, it is a smaller percentage, but if you look at some of the more what you're labeling kind of the core TFA commitments, you're seeing implementation rates, maybe partial combined with full implementation, but you're seeing implementation rates that are in 70, 80, even 90%. So that's somewhat encouraging, because I think we heard right at the outset, and I think it's a very genuine concern, just because somebody's committed to implement a provision doesn't mean it's actually been implemented. What I love about this study is we're really trying to identify where those gaps are. So I think both of these have a role to play, and particularly through this critical phase, because many of these provisions, even if they are labeled as TFA plus, these provisions can still be implemented, including that TFA plus component. And that's obviously going to be more relevant to issues of paperless trade, cross-border paperless trade. But even, as I'll point out, even in sustainability, I think there are some links that could be made. So, in the WTO, within the discussions that we see in the committee, there's often, I think, a good integrated appreciation of TFA and TFA plus and how they can interact. I'll just give one example on digitalization. Tunisia has to implement their advanced rulings provision under Article 3 by 2030. Now, there's nothing in Article 3 which requires a digital system. Yet Tunisia, with the assistance of development partners, set up a system that enables economic operators to submit requests and track the status of their applications through a dedicated digital platform. Also, and I alluded to this earlier, even in sustainability. So I saw one of the measures under sustainability indicates tailoring an AEO scheme to include SMEs. Now, granted, there is nothing in Article 7.7 that explicitly requires the inclusion of AEOs. In fact, there's actually language I was looking at that says that AEO criteria shall not restrict SME participation. So it's kind of put in the negative, but nothing precludes their inclusion. And actually, in recent experience sharing presentations, we've heard from a number of members, both developed and developing, that are really, looking for ways to include SMEs through a number of different arrangements. So just my initial point is just that as we work through the survey and all of the tremendous data and results that are coming out of it, I think it's important to recognize that these TFA requirements, can continue to serve as a good incentive to implement digital and sustainable solutions, even when it's not mandated by the TFA. Okay, so having said that, let me go into a second point. I'll be very brief on this. Next slide, please. I just wanted to note one of the objectives, I think, in doing this type of gap analysis is seeing where do we direct assistance. And I just wanted to give you an initial report on what some colleagues at the WTO and the TFA facility have been doing in trying to identify implementation gaps. So they started with the question, what is the scale and nature of remaining TACB needs? They conducted a survey, sent out questions, got about a 50% response rate from those who had category C provisions, that is where development assistance had been requested. I'll skip that and go into the next slide. Here's a kind of visual presentation that's very crude, but this is preliminary. You can see there were a number that responded that they weren't looking for development assistance arrangements, even though they had initially indicated they would want them. And that suggests that members are, in certain instances, looking for ways to rely on domestic resources to implement these provisions. But among those that are remaining, those that are looking for arrangements, you had, let's see, the number is, I have it here. The number is 48, sorry, yes, thank you, that was helpful. There are 31 members that are still looking for arrangements, even though they have development partners. So that suggests that there's other aspects that they're seeking to implement. And you have 17 of those members who have no development partner. So last final slide. So the first point I already mentioned, that in some instances, members are relying on domestic resources. There is some variability here in terms of where TACB is concentrated. There are some provisions for which TACB is, development assistance is more readily available. I think risk management, AEOs, a single window, but there are other provisions. I'm thinking of test procedures and even in some instances, border agency cooperation, where there are still some needs unmet. So this is an example of the need for vertical scaling that's included on the slide. But the findings also show a need to cover more regions and languages and to ensure deeper and lasting interventions that can really guarantee sustainable long-term results. So I know I threw a lot out there, but I tried to keep to my 8 minutes. How did I do?
Very good. 7 minutes and 52 seconds.
Wow.
No, but I think thank you very much for emphasizing technical assistance and capacity building as well. I mean, this is one of the purpose of the survey actually, is to try to identify where are gaps that needs to be filled using technical assistance and capacity building. So actually matching some of the WTO data and some of the survey data may be quite useful in that regard. Thank you. Last but not least, on the discussant, we've got Sylvia, who made it in person, because I think I commented at some point that we were not sure whether you'd be online or physical, but you're here. I don't know whether you can see you. We may not be able to see you because of your angle, but Sylvia is in person with us.
Hear me.
We can hear you.
And I have 1 minute, no, I have 0 minutes actually.
I think you can take 5-6 minutes because we have a 15-minute gaps between the two sessions, so we're okay.
Thank you for the invitation. It's great to see everybody in person, and it's hard always to come last and to comment on so much rich and useful material. But I think what I would try to do in the next minutes is really just maybe think of what comes next. I think we already have a lot of rich, very useful material, but sort of where are we going to go from here? So we can go to the next slide. I think one key.
Sorry, is it possible for you to move to the other side, because apparently there is a microphone issue. I have a feeling this microphone is discriminating a bit, no? Because we only have women problem, right? With it's an issue, huh? Yeah. It's not designed, as a gender. Yeah. Something wrong there. We can hear you. Yeah, it's a participant. Let's hope so.
You can come up here.
I think the microphone.
Sorry.
All my minutes just.
Thank you, OECD, for testing the microphone.
Okay, third time is a charm. And speak up. No, it's just thanking everybody. So, if we can go to the next slide, I think one key takeaway that we can get from the survey is that indeed we see a lot of good progress globally across all these areas, which is great. And agriculture, trade facilitation for women, for SMEs, and also this new aspects around trade facilitation and environmental sustainability. I think one key aspect of where we go next, and this is something I think that Anders was also highlighting in his intervention, is that we need to know more about how we close this gap between what do we say in terms of the regulatory framework, how we actually implement it in practice. And this is something that in our own work at the OECD, we have been struggling to collect information on. So I think we see a lot of good progress in terms of putting those regulatory frameworks in place. And I think we're also seeing that through some of the statistics that Jesse was highlighting, vis-a-vis what countries are mentioning that they're doing, but we know much less in terms of how that works in practice. So I think we need to do much more there. And I'll come back to this, but one of the areas that we've started to work on also increasingly is trade facilitation and environmental sustainability. And it is challenging, and I think we can see it again just with the CITES example, just one area, one document, how hard it is, how much legal framework regulations need to have behind that data exchange. So when we start unpacking all the different areas through which trade facilitation can matter for environment sustainability, it gets even trickier. So if we can go to the next slide. Maybe I'll just skip this one because I think we have a very good focus currently on the regulatory frameworks, but I want to highlight some of the learnings that we have from a couple of works that we have been doing or we are doing currently at the OECD. So for instance, in terms of the SPS electronic certification, we've tried to compile data on what OECD countries are doing and exactly with whom they're exchanging these types of certificates, on which products, and it gets really complicated. Because some of our members, well, they're doing this with selected trading partners through different kind of agreements or arrangement only for specific products. So once you start compiling that information, you realize it's very challenging. So I think having a sort of a question that frames how are you doing in general around this regulatory framework is great as a first step, but some of the key insights that we haven't taken from this work is that you really need to go much deeper to understand how that works in practice. We can go to the next slide. Another piece of work that we carried out recently was a trade and gender review of Latin America, which doesn't focus exclusively on trade facilitation, but really on how these gender perspectives are taking into account more broadly into trade policy making. And trade facilitation is, of course, one aspect of that. So I'll not spend the time that I don't have to go through all the different examples that we cover in the review, but I think we can see a lot of interesting programs in the region, going from Costa Rica to Peru, where really there is a thinking, and I think Paul was highlighting also a nice result from the survey, that there is this incorporation of gender, women focus issue in policies or BRIC frameworks for trade facilitation. So I think we see that. But here again, what we see less is that the less of an assessment of what that actually means in practice, of how many women are covered, how many women-led businesses manage to export or to trade much more easily through these kind of programs. So I think that different trade facilitation aspects matter, but we know less again of what happens in practice. And if we can go to my final slide. Coming to this area of environmental sustainability and trade facilitation, we have been really struggling of taking like a full good perspective on the different issues that might matter. So what we are currently doing in this work that is really in progress, and it would be great to stay in touch and discuss as this evolves, because we find this very complex. So what we are trying to do now is to sort of trade facilitation lens to a product's environmental life cycle. So going from the production side, where we see that we have all these new non-product related processes and production methods, and I think we're
I was mentioning a lot of these developments, for instance, that we are seeing in the European Union, but there are many others out there in terms of certification, traceability, and so on. Then we go to the usage segment. And here again is not as straightforward because we have environmental goods issues, which have their own aspects and matter in terms of how you classify and use certification, again, labeling and standard and so on. And then the end of life segment in terms of the waste. It gets even more complicated if you speak about waste for disposal or waste for recovery. We have been touching, or other panelists have been touching in their presentations on the Basel Convention and the OECD. We actually have an own convention that actually just covers a waste destined for recovery, and which is also supposed to undertake all these notification, consent procedures electronically. But then when you match that with Basel, you know, in practice, you realize that there are a lot of other challenges. And last, also in terms of the end of life, is that we're trying to look also at issues that matter for reuse and remanufacturing. And here are some of the challenges that we're seeing now is, of course, in terms of classification. Customs has a lot of challenge with what is waste. How do you actually manage to ensure that, yeah, it's not something that should go for disposal, but it's something that will end up going for remanufacturing. Valuation, risk management, again, how do you incorporate all these aspects? So all in all, what we're trying to do is that we're taking the economy-wide framework that we have for the large trade facilitation indicators and try to see, applying this lens, that basically what is the share of trade facilitation efforts that are destined towards some of these aspects. So of course, we don't want to say in the end, you know, there should be any discriminatory treatment towards environmental goods or any other of these issues in terms of waste, but how much of your overall framework touches upon efforts that have to do with environmental sustainability issues. So it's work in progress. I think there are a lot of synergies, and yeah, definitely looking forward to stay in touch on this because it's extremely interesting, but yet a very challenging area we find. So I'll stop here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I mean, your last slide actually is very useful because I think many of us are working on similar issues. And I think and personally, I believe there is no issue with discriminating between the different products. I mean, if some products are more important than others, then you should facilitate them more. I mean, I know that sounds reasonable to me, but we can have another workshop to discuss that issue at some later stage. We are late, so I apologize as the moderator for making everybody late. We're going to take a 5 plus 7 minute break, I think, before we start the next session. But I'd like to thank all the speakers, the discussant, for very valuable information shared. Thank you again.
Thank you. So we will.
And I apologize. I mean, we cannot answer all the questions, right? I mean, I think some of us have been trying to answer some of the questions online, but I think a lot of the discussion also provides some answer to some of the things that have been asked here. Yeah.
Good. So we will start 17 minutes past, as Jan just has declared. So yeah, comfort break, and hope to see you back.